Okay, please.
Hello, I'm Nandan Mukherjee. I'm from Dundee. I am the director of Binks Institute for Sustainability at the University of Dundee. At the same time, I'm a senior lecturer there. I'm here to learn more about this ReWET project and how we can better collaborate. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Becky. I'm a PhD student at the University of York, studying urban green spaces in Bangladesh for health, biodiversity and climate change resilience.
Hi, I'm Nicola Salisbury. I'm a researcher at IIED for the International Institute for Environment and Development, and I work on climate finance and nature finance.
Hi, I'm Tahbina Yasmin. I work at the University of Birmingham with the Center for Birmingham Institute for Sustainability and Climate Action. I worked in different Horizon Europe project where they are looking into cities' approach to bankability aspect to finance this climate adaptation and mitigation project, as well as I looked into water-based risk in terms of too little, too little or too messy. So I work a lot in water pollution context. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Efadul Huq. I'm a human geographer by training. I'm currently working as associate professor in human geography and environment at the University of York. My work, I've been working in Bangladesh for quite some time now. It's been 16 years, I think. And my work in Bangladesh predominantly focuses on urban climate change resilience. But broadly speaking, I work across Global South in African context and Latin American context as well. And that predominantly addresses climate change resilience, both urban and peri-urban areas. Happy to be here today.
Hello, I'm Sandar Win. I'm the division head at Sheffield Business School at Sheffield University. I came to learn about this project and I'm interested in international development. Currently, I'm leading a British Academy funded project on research capacity management, supporting tiny universities. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and Bangladesh is very close to my heart. I've lived there from 2004 to 2008, and until 5 years ago, I was able to understand Bengali, but now don't ask me. So yeah, that's about me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Sifullah Khaled, one of the hosts from Sheffield University, co-leading the project. My bit was the finance bit. So I'm teaching there in finance and economic division, but working with microfinance industry for quite a long time in Bangladesh because the Institute of Microfinance is currently now Ministry of Inclusive Development and Finance, and as well as Ministry of Finance in one of the institutions before coming here and working in the academy here. So it's an intersection of development finance, climate finance, and currently with these we are also getting scope of understanding more of like biodiversity finance. This project is an eye-opener, and when me and Tanzil was, it took a year or two to get into the project, but this is one of the interesting projects in the urban setting for Bangladesh, which is something invisible from the overall spectrum, from the policy perspective or the implementation perspective. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here. We'll have more when we discuss.
Good afternoon. I'm Efadul Huq. I'm Professor of Finance and FinTech in Swansea University. And as you can guess, everyone is jumping on climate risk, biodiversity, and FinTech, and so did I. Focus changed a bit of my work, and probably I'm here because of my dear external Khaled. And I did some work and continuously doing some work on climate risk, biodiversity, but my focus is mostly international rather than specifically on Bangladesh. And mostly my work is on like sort of content rather than macro aspects. So I'd be delighted to hear your thoughts because so many people working here in Bangladesh area. And good to see some people from York, because I left York a few years back. And good to see some colleagues from there. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Sharmin Shabul Rahman. I'm currently based in the Management School of Sheffield University. My area of research is, though directly not with this, I work on ESG, like environment, social, and governance, but mostly on the garment sector of Bangladesh. But nowadays, because of the factories in Bangladesh, there are lots of climate-related issues happening, and that's the reason why I'm interested in this. So that's me.
Hi, this is Imran. So I am currently a PhD student at the University of Manchester. I'm working on the political economy of environmental and labor standards in the leather industry of Bangladesh. But previously, I graduated from the Development Studies Department in Bangladesh, University of Dhaka. I am one of the first batch of undergraduates, studying development in Bangladesh. So, and then I joined Dhaka University as well. So I was teaching there before coming here. So I'm very much interested to learn about this research project and to contribute, if I can, a little bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sarwar Hussain. I'm a senior lecturer and director of the postgraduate program, School of Social and Environmental Sustainability, University of Glasgow. So I'm based in Dumfries campus, so that's why I'm quite late. Guys, missed the lunch and also the networking event. Hopefully we can have chat and more about our works. My main focus on social and ecological system approach, especially modeling and how it can be applied to sustainability challenges, especially water, food, and climate change. I work both in Africa and Asian deltas. I'm one of the co-I in Africa Europe Research Excellence Cluster on Nature-Based Solution for Adaptation to Climate Change. So, and I think this is how we've been in getting in touch with the project. So I'm looking forward to not only the project, but also wider discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Devine. I'm at the University of Bath, and I'm just very curious about Bangladesh. Following Joe is a difficult thing. So, Palash Zaman, Professor of Social Policy at the University of South Wales, was having some joke with some colleagues. Don't send me Australia, that's New South Wales. We have the original South Wales in Wales. I just do research in Bangladesh. And as I said, following Joe is difficult. I came to this country as a PhD student in Liverpool. Then my journey followed from Liverpool to Leicester, Nottingham, and at some point Bath, where Joe was my boss at Winter. And you can see in state starstruck maybe. So I said maybe just in case. Maybe. Yeah. And I was asking when I came to Bath, I actually during our undergrad I read Joe's work, I read Sarah White's work, and all of a sudden I was working with them. It's amazing. So I work on humanitarian development, global governance, global development, and my current works focus on genocide, politics of genocide, recognition of genocide on Rohingyas, global displacement, Turkey, Jordan, the host communities perspective, and also expertise in development. Who the hell makes expert? Is there nationality, passport positionality, nationality, whatever. So that's what I do at this stage. Thanks.
I'm Manoj Roy. I work in Lancaster Environment Center, Lancaster University. So I will introduce myself as a human geographer now. With part of my work equally falling to urban geography, but as well as when it comes to Bangladesh, kind of boundaries is broken. So I work both in rural context and urban context. On the urban side, I also have quite a long story in terms of working in Bangladesh, but also working across Africa. So there is an interesting project we just finished, and we're kind of beginning to understand. It's called recirculate. It's kind of capacity building with the urban informal settlement and doing research in this one. And perhaps one of the things would be quite interesting for me to sort of learn in that project, we found that in urban areas, it probably needs to engage with the cityscape because some of the services or some other things we call focusing on the informal settlements require much bigger kind of thinking because some of the pollution landscape we are talking is not limited to within these informal areas. So some of the work that we have done that involved controlled trial experiment, trying to address a problem by trying some solutions. For example, one of the things we found out that in low-income settlements, water comes in a kind of safe way, but when it is consumed, it gets contaminated by localized contamination. And we kind of tried to sort of see whether by intervening in a certain area, whether we can minimize those contamination, but it appears to be that it's not possible. One of the conclusions that is coming out that perhaps these wide areas that is occupied by low-income settlements has produced those areas as a contamination corridor, meaning that we probably have to sort of really work at a city scale or even bigger so that what happens in particular sites can be influenced. So I think it would be very interesting to see that when you talk about this one, could we actually solve it at a site scale or do we need to sort of really work at a city scale? Sort of the other work that involves Bangladesh in delta areas, I was also part of a Leading Delta's Hub project, which is a 5-year project. And in that project, I was responsible to implement and research to study how rural livelihoods, particularly in delta contexts, are changing and whether youth entrepreneurship can help positively diversify some of those changes. So yeah, I think I'm very interested to hear what's going on here. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shami Mohammed Mita, and I'm currently having my master's in climate change development and policy at University of Sussex, ITS. Besides, I'm also founder and executive director of a non-profit organization named EcoNetwork Global Foundation that is actually working with young people in Bangladesh and South Asian countries. So I'm currently studying here as a Sheffield scholar, and looking forward to learn from all of you and of course about this project. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Sifullah Khaled. I'm a professor of finance at the University of Dhaka. At the same time, I'm currently working at the University of Leeds as a visiting research fellow. My work mostly is focusing on climate finance, climate risk financing, disaster risk financing, and ESG finance. So I'm by training and finance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We just have just a way of sort of getting into the thick of things. We have tapped on the shoulder of some to give us sort of like short provocations based on their work. So this is again, people with whom I'm informal is like last minute, I need you to speak for 10 minutes. So that's my methodology of choosing. So again, so this is really not about individual projects. It's much more to bring as many topics we can just to see how we unpack it from a very interdisciplinary perspective. I mean, by the way of introduction, it's very apparently clear. I mean, one thing that I'd like to mention before we go in, and what if we saw Bangladesh as a method rather than a particular geography? And what I mean by that, you have seen, and all of you are aware that you're now pushed in grants about interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and oftentimes it's really, really tokenistic. And one of the reasons of grants not getting through is because it can be really understood well if it's not really disciplinary. So one key way that we really thought about this is, to use Bangladesh as a method. I mean, I disagree with Dr. Hafiz here that he's not working in Bangladesh because even the background, that a lot of the sort of background information and wisdom that he has from his previous experience, that is not codified as knowledge, but we would want to tap into that and sort of like see it as much more in exchange with others. So this is really, the idea is not really about gathering people who work in Bangladesh, it's much wider in the sense that if we were to take a nation state as a particular point in focus and use that as an interdisciplinary lens, bringing in climate change, environment, finance, all of that. So that's really what we're trying to get to. So I mean, this is where I feel, again, it's going to be a learning session for all of us. Yeah, so that's really our perspective here. I will give a very short introduction just to give a sense of the project, and then we'll have 4 people, including Dr. Sadi from Bangladesh, to give, again, so the first session is geared towards listening slightly in depth, and then we'll open the floor, and then we'll have some prompts, impromptu prompts, just to really gather the discussion around. But again, the modus operandi here is that you are able to pick things from the conversation and then sort of bring it forward as you see. So again, I don't think interdisciplinary discussions truly will be dictated by by my own understanding. So that's why I'm just giving justification of why I'm not prepared well. So you have seen the documentary, and Dr. Sadi, we just played the documentary that I'll send you the link. But moving on, just to give an idea of this idea that that you saw that we're working with particularly women-led organization called Nogorabad. And I always start our project discussions with the funder always with what they are putting in their Facebook page. So this is a screenshot of Nogorabad in their Facebook page, what they see as work of ReWET, like how they portray it, how they talk about it, what's their story. So this is this is their page, and you can go in their Facebook page and see a lot of the ReWET work, and they're like, we're doing it, and like, excellent, that's the whole point. So again, I'll talk about it in a bit. One of the key things that I would like to say is that for the first time we said, hang on a minute, researchers come to you, extract data, and go and get papers done. No, it's not going to happen like that. So we said, okay, what are the guidelines for working with community that prevents extractive knowledge practices. So this is in Bangla, but this is all of it is it's all about how you can have co-production. So what are the rules? How do you preserve dignity of people? So again, I'm putting this in because, we will go into much more academic discussions, but I think it needs to be, grounded in the reality that we're talking about people who live precarious lives in really difficult situations, and we don't want to academicize it only for the sake of, us academics. So this is sort of like the background in which you're operating. This is, in one of the rooms, which is a makeshift office. We're having discussions. I will show a particular spot that we have built in the ground, which is a demonstration site where we're working with landscape architects and botanists about what sort of plant species, what sort of tools, nature-based tools we can do in the ground, and how to demonstrate it to people. So this is a demonstration site, and the model is made by them. It's together, locally. So this is right now, it has been built. It looks quite simple, but trust me, there is a huge backstory of, the first day the bamboo went in, call from Gulshan side, if you know the context, there's like, they're in the lake, we need to take it down, and all this backstory of political maneuverings that actually is not present in a picture like that. So, we're in a stage where we are ending year 2. We have tested the tools. So, and we've just opened the demonstration site. So people, stewards, farmers, they can come and learn and, what are the tools being done. So this was just open. That's the head of engineering from Dhaka North City Corporation. They came and opened it recently. There is a lot of tools being tested within, like what sort of plant species, what fishes. So that is on the ground happening as a way of testing tools. For example, this is made out of recycled bottle. This is a floating island that actually purifies water. So there is a backstory. All of this, is it producing change? Yes. So we can sense, we are now doing water testing, but you can see the watercolor difference across that. There is a geobag filtration. So so you can see the color. the green is actually polluted water and the bluish water is inside, and you can visibly see the water quality changing. So that's at one level where we are on the ground, we're working with the community, that's level one. Now, of course, this is from the Gulshan side. We are trying to work with Gulshan Society, which is a much more affluent side on the other side of the lake. And we're trying to portray this idea that their idea of a green edge that has no plants, only grass and lake, like swimming pool, it's not really good. You need biodiversity back into the city. You need to, so that's another conversation going on the other side. We are producing toolkits that can be used to train. So all of this idea of waste, how to manage trees, how to manage community infrastructure, how to work with water. So this is being done right now. It's like booklets written in Bangla, written in very easy, almost like comic book way, so that anyone on an average sort of education can also learn from that. So that's again the community end, and then we have a pot of about £55,000 to give to stewards. That's where the financial advisor consultant comes in, who's sitting next to me conveniently. So we have been working, it's like, what are the finance mechanisms through which, and he'll talk about that in a bit. I'll not go into the detail. Is it a smart cash transfer? Is it we use the working capital, and then how to make it sustainable. So we're testing out different finance models about how to grow the stewardship, essentially create stewards who take care of their lake, and not just from outside. So we have done a few stakeholder symposium meetings. Just recently, in December 2025, we just had exchange workshop across finance, policy, and society. In the same token that we want to bring this interdisciplinary conversation here, we just did this in Bangladesh. And again, you might know some of the people there, but again, this is bringing together embassies, large organizations such as PKSF and them, but also climate activists, youth on the ground. So again, providing a platform in which the typical silos are broken. That's really what we have been trying to do. So this is on the back of that. And then we have been trying to really understand that ecosystem that is there, that we need to understand if we are to think of scaling up. Like, how does this kind of solutions that is working on the ground, we've tested it, we've piloted it, how does it go? How does it scale up as an actual program? How does it get 250 million pounds or dollars from the GCF fund? What sort of calibration do we need? Which is why we met with many actors, CPD, PKSF, UNDP. Just they didn't get 2 GCF funds, so they can share what doesn't work. And then also linking with climate finance and local finance, institutions, academics. So this is really where we are right now, and this is why we said let's convene people who have been working in Bangladesh and who have sort of expertise from different experiences of what are the barriers they faced. Why does projects that have really good promise don't end up as national programs or local programs or city level programs? What are the barriers there? What are the barriers in our policy? And sort of what sort of innovations can you compare across sites like Africa and other countries, even in Asia, but are something structural or something particular to Bangladesh that only in Bangladesh happens? So we're trying to understand that as we're going to be sort of moving on to the final years of our project in ReWET. We want to end with a policy note that is very grounded and which has soaked in all the experiences from all of you. So yes, this is actually an FGD. Yeah, no, it's not. Again, just to end, so my last point would be, this is the wetland loss that has happened in Dhaka from 1978 to 2009. This is existential crisis. There are many examples where cities that did not manage their water well have to be sort of abandoned. So this is an existential crisis in which we are. This is 2009. So imagine even 50% less of that right now. So again, this idea of that why we need to scale up and why we need to move beyond, our own academic sort of outputs, but get into, actual implementation. That's why we feel, we want to push, we want to engage. Dr. Sadi here is, he's deputy secretary in the government, so he will, share what are the ways that we can work to bring these knowledges together. So that's where we see the potential for scaling up, repositioning ecological restoration, not opposed to economic development, because this is a traditional trope of ecology versus economy, and we say no. So we have so that's one. Scaling community, how do you scale it up as a city? What are the sort of fintech innovations or other innovations that can come into play? So for today, that's really the large goal. Mapping the landscape, understanding from different disciplines. How does experiences like Nanda will share? What are the things that you experienced? We want to bring in this idea of a post-aid Bangladesh, where LDC graduation, we're looking into where development funds are going to dry up. We need to really get climate finance, other sources of funding into the city, so how will that transition look? And then, really crucially, how does research get into action on the ground? Because we would like to sort of move beyond the colonial form of research, which is extractive and which only sees all of this as a form of a capitalist understanding of knowledge. So we want to move beyond that. You may call it decolonial, you may call it co-reversal. I don't mind any tag, as long as it is a move towards justice. So that would be me. And so Shimona, if you would like to start, then please take it away. I'll just share from here. That's okay. We're sharing the screen, so it should be. So if you're presenting slides, we can just come.
All right, thank you very much, Tanzil, for the wonderful and brief background on the project. Actually, when I was engaged in the project, it was actually a very interesting and exciting opportunity for me to work in the project, because my responsibility primarily was to find out a financial model that works in the long run. It's not just within the project period. Can we have a financial model that not only promotes the continuous and sustainable maintenance of the wetland protection that is being protected, but at the same time, can it be financially incentivizing for the community who are doing the job, and can it be continued? The entire system can be continued even beyond the project life. So probably this is one of the fundamental questions. So from my end, I think one of the key discussions today is aimed at understanding the mysterious triangle between nature, finance, and justice. I'm a core finance, I'm a direct student of SAR. So we learn core finance, and the people who learn core finance are not good at in social stuffs, because we are built to be capitalists. Anyway, maximization of wealth for the the rich people.
Stakeholders.
So the concept of justice, the concept of nature is very much near to the field of finance as a core discipline. And now we are actually trying to rethink finance. And as you see across different universities, you see now we are seeing courses in sustainable finance. Why? It's because the finance people are now also thinking in a different way. Okay, finance has to be for good, not just for the top 1% of the society who are investing in the stock market, who are building wealth. So the ReWET actually gave me a fantastic opportunity. And one of the objectives, as I said, is of the ReWET project was to construct a financial model that benefits the community, who are actually, because I don't know whether you are clear about it, the ReWET project being implemented, Tanzil or the team, they did not do anything. The community people, they owned it and they are doing themselves. So we need to find, so one of the primary aim of building a financial model that would incentivize them, that would keep the job continued even beyond the project period. So two questions I think are very critical to understand in this lens. One is that most of the development projects we see in the developing economies, including Bangladesh, across Nigeria, Africa, wherever you go, has the fundamental problem of unsustainability of the project itself. So you go there, you build the project, take the project for 5 years. After the project is done, everything goes away. So in this project, Tanzil Bhai is trying to implement low-cost solution for preventing water pollution. But what happens after 5 years? The pollution will go back to the initial level, right? So that is one critical problem that probably it is high time that we need to think. And then how can actually justice concepts be embedded into financial models that benefit not only the people, not only the nature, but also it becomes self-sustainable. And of course, we are also probably now, a lot of discussions we are seeing is whether these financial models can be locally led and locally owned, that some funders will not have to come in, and that as long as the funder is giving money, it's working. When the funder goes back, it's not working. So we want to build a model that is self-sustaining. And one of the key ingredients of self-sustaining models is, of course, it has to be owned and operated by the communities. So can we really do that? That is one of the fundamental questions that came into our mind when we were having lots of discussions throughout the project. The model that Tanzil Bhai showed was constructed by us. That was my job. You saw the tree diagram kind of thing. So I'm not going to go into the detail of that technicalities of those tree diagrams. Instead, the proposition that we tried to build in within those models are the most important things probably for today's discussion. So the first one was the proposition, the financial model that we proposed there was in a way that it will be locally led, and the wetland that is being restored, the restoration will be continued beyond the project lifetime. So that was one of the features that was embedded within the model. Secondly, the model ensures that it pays financially. It provides economic incentives to the people, the stewards that are actually working there. And thirdly, the model would have a feature. I mean, already we have actually designed the model. So the model has a feature or components that actually protects the restored wetland from biodiversity threats like climate change impacts, for example, from floods, sudden flash floods. And fourth is, while doing the first three, we don't want the farm that is being seeded back from the project to be finished in the project period and then no fund is there. So we wanted a model where the farm will be self-growing. So if it self-grows, it becomes self-sustainable. So that was another, and we embedded some market-based approaches there. And finally, we embedded another feature within the financial model is involving tokenization processes, because this project that is being implemented is going to create biodiversity positive impacts on the biodiversity and the nature. So we propose within the model, one of the features will measure those outcomes and convert them into digital tokens that can be sold back to the market through the blockchain technology to potential CSR funders, or even any institution could buy those who would like to fund nature and the biodiversity protection. So 4 fundamental principles I have already explained. One is, of course, it is locally led, the way we design, and it will be community owned, not only owned. So community ownership is extremely important, because if the community does not own the model itself, it's never going to work. And the community operated as well. So the model is designed in a way that there will be people coming from the community who will be actually steering that model to work, always. So no one from the external side, like Tanzil Bhai, will never go there to see whether it's working or not. So it's so that it becomes self-independent model actually. And finally, we built on the concept of cooperative clustered approach, because in the vegetation that were done, you saw in the video, we actually clustered the community there into clusters of economic activities. And I mean, cluster by cluster, we were proposing a cooperative society to be built there. But under that cooperative society, this financial model will support the community people in a clustered approach. So clusters were by the type of nature-based activities that they will be delivering within the project. So, so the models actually involved, to give you a bit of 1 minute background on the financial model that we thought was, the project had a small grant to start with. It's a seed grant. So once the seed grant is there, when I started the work, Tanzil said that, what can we do with this? So if the project has 2 years lifetime left, with the seed grant, if you give, let's say, cash for work or cash away to the community people, in 2 years' time, there will be no money left, right? So everything will be given away. Now, then I asked, what will happen after the project? Can we use this seed grant in a way so that it can grow itself, and at the same time, from the growth of the fund, the nature-based activities that you are targeting can be supported together. So that's how actually the model was built. So in doing so, we embedded insurance within the model. We embedded a part of the fund to be invested in marketable securities like risk-free investments, like treasuries, for example, or fixed deposits in commercial banks. The concept of fixed deposit is not really prominent in the UK because nobody saves money here. So that you can earn a fixed income every year. So it had insurance built in so that it can protect against climate risks like floods. It had an income generating component where it, from the income of the fund, a portion will be given away to the community people to do income generating vegetation and economic activities within the project zone. And finally, the last one is we had a component of the fund to give it to the community to start new businesses. So it's kind of seed grant, and there was also a part where we were proposing to have an lending program, micro lending program from the fund. So it's a little bit complicated, but we're not going to the technical detail today. So what challenges from the experience we had, in the last year, we designed the model, and we are in a position to pilot that now. And once we pilot that, we probably will be able to answer whether it's really working or not, but we are confident that it will work. We are very much hopeful that it will work. If it works, combining tokenization, insurance, and market-based everything together, this probably will be one of the most effective financial models and solutions that are used in Bangladesh for climate and nature-based activities. So from the experience of developing this model, there are 5 questions that came up. One is, does the community really want to own it? We have a bit of concern about it.
Tricky.
Very tricky. Initially, we had the idea that, okay, they would love it. But in the ground reality, we saw that, no, it's not the consistent answer we are getting from the people. Second question is, does the community really is the community really able to perceive the long-term benefit over the short-term ones? Because nature-based benefits take time to generate. So that was one of the areas we saw that people are more short-sighted, tend to be short-sighted. So third is the value of nature. And our experience says that people there are more focused into economic incentives instead of protecting the nature. So that is one challenge we faced. Fourth question we faced is how does the community balance incentives with conflict? So in this model, because we said it's led by community, operated by community. So, and then conflicts started to arise between the people when we discussed who will take the leadership. And there were internal conflicts within the group. There we saw groups were emerging. So that is that is a challenge we believe is a critical, because if these kind of conflicts persist, it's not really going to work properly. And finally, does the community have enough capacity to understand and implement this and carry out this model? So a lot of capacity gaps we found. So in today's discussions, I think I tried to pose 6 questions that could be interesting to discuss. Number one is, of course, as I said in the beginning, that not only because Bangladesh, IIED works across different developing countries, for example, many of you work across different developing countries. How do we ensure self-sustainability of the activities we are supporting? Because if the project ends, then nothing is going to be there. So how can you ensure that? One of the key ingredients, if we want to ensure that, is ensuring financial sustainability. So that is one area probably we need to now think in the global south context. And then how do we embed justice principles in what we do? So it's a very tricky question, how do we embed justice? And thirdly, as I said, justice has to be looked into not only from macro to micro level as well. So in the current climate finance landscape globally, Global South feels that it's not ensuring justice from many different dimensions. I'm not going into that discussion today. That's a totally separate discussion. So at the macro level, there is global injustice, but within the micro level also, does the community that deserve the money, actually whether the money is going there or not? So we see that funds coming into Bangladesh probably are not going to the direction that to the community, to the people, benefits are not really going to them. And the fourth question to discuss is about, you know, that the globally public finance is drying up. We all know that. In most of the cases now, private capital is coming into play, becoming dominant, but private capital comes where there is business. That's why we talked today that adaptation now has to be turned into bankable projects. Otherwise, money is not flowing there. If that is the case, how can you ensure, how can we actually cool off the trade-off between private interest and the public interest, community interest? So that's one of the domain probably in the next few years we'll have to work a lot, discuss a lot. And finally, the fifth is, of course, the transparency. I'll be finishing in 1 minute, Tanzil bhai. It's very critical to understand that in developing countries, a lot of private capital is flooding in from the developed countries, particularly from big multilateral development banks or big banks like MUFG Japan, for example. But we need to ensure, we need to probably question them whether the money that is coming in, whether we are able to ensure enough transparency about where the money is being implemented, about what impact truly it is creating, whether there is greenwashing or climate washing happening or not. So the transparency is a critical thing, and most unfortunately in countries like us, where technology is not up to that scale, MRV technology is still not really at that scale. So it's difficult to ensure transparency of the private capital that is coming in. And finally, as I said, actually, probably this is the high time to rethink our global financial architecture, but also the financial models that are being sold to the global south. On a very rigorous way, I'm saying, but we believe that the NDBs, the big banks that are bringing in financial models to support climate actions, nature actions, probably we need to ask them, question them whether they are really suitable for the destinations that they are going. Probably we need to rethink the financial architectures and models. So so in my, and that's all from me. So in my experience, I have been working for the last 16 years with all the multilateral development banks. I'm very much critical about them, but I also work for them. I'm also working with the IIED, I'm also working with the ADB, FAO, and everything. So I've seen them closely. We are now starting to question them, whether their financial models are really.
You know, this is recorded and it will be like, don't see this. Best of luck with your future consultant.
So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next, Nicola. Yeah, that's just easier.
Yeah.
I'll just open it up here.
Yeah.
There is tea and coffee and biscuits there, so feel free to just get them.
Okay. I think everybody can hear me. I'm going to try and talk as loud as I can. My voice is quite low, so just stop me if you can't hear me. So thank you for inviting me to speak today. As I said earlier, my name is Nicola. I'm a researcher at IIED, or the International Institute for Environment and Development. You will have seen our logo on the slide at the beginning. That's because IIED hosts the REDAA programme on behalf of the UK government, FCDO, which is funding the ReWET project. So, I'm just acknowledging that.
Absolutely.
I'm not personally involved in the project management team of REDAA at IIED, so I'm here in a different capacity to talk more generally about our work on climate and nature finance. But yeah, just to acknowledge that so that you know how we're linked in already with this community a little bit. Okay, so IIED has worked for many years on this issue of access to climate and nature finance, particularly from an equity perspective, so thinking about supporting locally led action in line with the needs and priorities of our partners. And so that tends to be for climate adaptation, we're talking about the least developed countries, small island developing states, and then when we think about nature, there's more of an emphasis on indigenous peoples and local communities, and really any community that's really facing the harshest impacts of these issues. And then we really have a call to try and unify what we mean when we say climate finance, nature finance. Actually, I'm talking about them separately, but really because they're dealt with separately in the policy space under two different conventions. But when we're talking about adaptation, especially climate finance, nature finance is really the same thing. The needs from the local level in terms of how those things are conceived and what the needs are very much the same. And especially with this project, I think you can see that adaptation often comes in the form of a nature-based solution. And so just to acknowledge that, we do try to sort of move away from that silo wherever we can. So you'll see on the slide here, these are the principles for locally led adaptation. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with these, so I'll give a brief background for those who aren't. So IIED is quite involved in the development of these principles alongside many other stakeholders. They were launched in 2021 in response to calls from the LDC group that 70% of climate adaptation finance should go directly to LDCs and SIDS, given that they're the most vulnerable countries to climate impacts. And you'll see, I won't go through all of them, but they speak to this issue of equity and justice in climate finance, so devolving decision making to the lowest appropriate level, ensuring that funding is patient, predictable, and can be accessed more easily, etc. And they've gained quite a bit of momentum in the policy space, so they've been endorsed by over 140 organisations now, including I think around 20 or so governments. They've been locally led adaptation has been mentioned in the Global Goal on Adaptation, which is in the UNFCCC framework, and several multilateral funders now have LLA funding schemes specifically to finance projects that are implementing locally led adaptation. And IIED's work really uses these principles as a framework for what we do. So I mentioned this as well because Bangladesh was actually one of the front-runner countries in LLA, and there's now a national framework on LLA in Bangladesh, and I think they were the first country to develop one of those, which was launched only last year in 2025. So this hopefully should create an enabling environment for projects such as this one, which when it's framed at LLA, so that's a really interesting thing to bear in mind here. What I would say is the LLA principles have been critiqued for several reasons, particularly because they're not very strong on talking about nature and biodiversity. They're very much developed thinking about climate adaptation finance. But given what I said earlier, there have been efforts to try and unify that and think about these principles across different sectors, so climate, nature, development finance more widely. And so actually some of my colleagues have done a new initiative recently around the principles for inclusive nature action, which is actually a new set of principles which is based on the LLA principles but also on the Shandia principles, which are from an indigenous organisation called the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. So what these new principles attempt to do is really embed more of a kind of rights-based approach, the perspective of Indigenous peoples and a gender perspective into the framework that was laid by LLA. So these are quite an emerging set of principles. They're quite nascent in policy. They don't have endorsement yet, but I just wanted to mention them because it's quite relevant to the ReWET project and also to make this point that actually we shouldn't be looking at climate and nature as two distinct things, and in many cases the same principles apply when we're talking about finance at the local level. So just to talk, kind of zoom out a little bit more and talk a bit more about policy commitments globally at the moment on climate and nature finance. The Baku to Belém roadmap had a target to scale up finance for climate action to $1.3 trillion by 2035. And there was also a commitment made last year at COP30 in Brazil to triple adaptation finance. And then within the Biodiversity Convention, we now have the Global Biodiversity Framework, which has two targets. It aims to raise $200 billion of new finance for biodiversity per year and then repurpose $500 billion per year from harmful subsidies by 2030. So really the point here is these are huge numbers of finance, and the evidence so far suggests that we're not really meeting these targets yet. And yeah, we're quite far behind where we should be. But crucially, even less of that finance that there actually is reaching the local level or is locally led. So there's those two elements. Firstly, not enough finance, but then also there's just this idea of actually how much is reaching where it needs to be. So just to acknowledge that some funds that have been set up to deliver these targets do include their own sub-targets to get funding to the local level. For example, some of you might know the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, the Cali Fund, the TFFF, they all have a target to get 20% of their funds to Indigenous peoples and local communities. But we don't know if that's really happening yet. I think it's too soon to tell, but that's really where our focus often is, on looking at whether these targets are really being implemented or not. So I'm just going to mention one study that we did to that effect recently. So this was a paper called Locally Implemented or Locally Led, where we looked at climate finance from the OECD. So that had been reported to the OECD and tagged as finance for climate, and tried to identify how much had firstly reached the local level, but then secondly was locally led. So there's a distinction there between whether finance is actually going to where it should be versus is it actually locally owned, locally led? Do local communities have agency over how that money is spent? And what it found was that really not enough is reaching the local level. I don't know if you can see the text on the right clearly, but basically there's around 29% of finance that includes some reference to local implementation. So from that we kind of inferred that it was locally implemented. But the actual amount going to the local level is unknowable because it just isn't tracked in the way that these reporting systems that we have are set up. So there's a questionnaire around transparency and monitoring practices and indicators and whether they should be revised. And then at the bottom, the total reported climate finance that mentions locally led climate action, so thinking about finance that's locally led, was only estimated at 0.17%, so really tiny amounts. So that looks specifically at climate finance, so funding is tagged as being for climate. We're trying to now do the same type of study for biodiversity finance and to look at how that changes things, but that's still in progress and is forthcoming. But so far, the results look quite similar, to be honest. We did have to use a keyword search methodology for this, given that we didn't have, it isn't possible to actually track full amounts of finance to the local level because there just isn't a mechanism. So there were, of course, some problems with the methodology, but it was the best that we've been able to come up with and the best that we've seen across any other organisation as well. So that's a really interesting read if you fancy looking more into this. So what are the reasons then that finance isn't reaching where it should reach? So thinking about some of the structural barriers in the system, we've done a few studies on this. One of them on the left here, we looked specifically at the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, one of the multilateral funds. And this study revealed some interesting barriers to kind of how nature finance was reaching Indigenous peoples and local communities. So it included things like accreditation requirements. Often organisations need to be accredited to the main multilateral funders, such as the GEF, also the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund, in order to be able to apply for funding. But that's a really long and complicated process. High levels of intermediation, so there's lots of intermediaries in the finance chain, going from the multilateral funders through to an intermediary organisation, often another national level organisation before it gets to the local community. So finance gets siphoned off at every level, and that's another problem that we see. And then long and complex proposal requirements, a lack of transparency and knowledge around what the funding process is. All these things make it really difficult for local organisations to engage with the big funders that are there to kind of deliver on these global commitments. And similarly, in this study, we weren't able to determine exact figures that were going to the local level. It was just an estimate of how much was actually targeting the local level, but we couldn't say whether or not that was actually reaching it or not. So that's something that we've consistently seen and recommended, that really the transparency reporting practices need a rehaul in the system. The other study I wanted to point out on the right here, so this was a paper we published earlier this year, looking at nature finance through the lens of coloniality and racial justice. So this is really interesting, I think, although in the presentation we just had the nature finance and justice angle. Here we found that practices of nature finance delivery are still rooted in colonial practices which perpetuate racial hierarchies. So this is kind of a deeper look at structural problems in the global financial architecture, so not just from the multilateral funds, but it's a wider problem for nature finance, also climate, other types of development finance, etc. Quite a few interesting findings here. I don't have time to go through more, but just to maybe highlight a couple, it really kind of came to the fore that the language and terminology that is used and commonplace in climate and nature policy actually perpetuates these problems of coloniality and racial injustice. So, for example, even the term local and locally led is problematic from a colonial perspective because it basically obscures racial hierarchy. Same with things like developed countries versus developing countries, global north, global south, etc. The paper also outlined problems with the way that the finance system perpetuates an inequitable governance, whereby donor interests are usually the priority. So donors tend to design projects the way they think the project should be, and that's how we get called for proposals for a certain activity, for example, or whatever it might be, rather than it being designed at the local level. And so that's kind of the wrong way around at the moment. And also we made the point around how financial transfers in the system are still framed mostly as charitable from developed countries to developing, rather than addressing a reparative justice kind of model to address kind of past harms and colonial histories. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff in that paper if you have time to read it. So just thinking finally then about what can be done to improve these issues. I mean, I think the finance system we just heard about is a really good example actually, how these LLA principles are being already kind of embodied in practical financial mechanisms on the ground. Other things that we've recommended previously are things like using trusted intermediaries. So some of these funds where the intermediaries are already predetermined for a particular project, actually it should be the community themselves that chooses whether or not to work with an intermediary, and if they do, they should choose who that is. It shouldn't just be, okay, so we're using the GEF, so therefore it's UNEP or UNDP who are going to implement the project. Other things such as pooled funds, aggregator mechanisms, one example being country platforms. Some of you might have come across these, where a sort of tool whereby nature and climate finance is pooled at the national level and then spent in line with national priorities. And so that attempts to, I guess, streamline the amount of funding that's coming into a country, ensuring that it all goes to the right place and it's not just different funds trying to do different things. National priorities actually take the centre stage there to determine what happens to it all. And finally, supporting locally led financial mechanisms, so finance that's really generated at the local level and is not dependent on these external donors. So things like Indigenous-led funds, small-scale cooperatives, credit cooperatives, loan associations, the mechanism you just mentioned in the presentation earlier. Many of these models actually do already exist, but they don't have much support internationally. And so it's about looking to where they are and trying to promote more support for them. So yeah, and then on the last slide, I've just listed some resources for further information, things that IIED is doing at the moment, if it's helpful, including this is our recent strategy that we published on nature finance, so it outlines what we're trying to do with nature finance, what our goal and vision is, etc. So yeah, plenty more to read if we have time. I'll stop there.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is you don't have slides.
Yeah.
Good.
In fact, I haven't prepared anything, so I'll just.
So you don't have to move. But I mean, if you would like to have and then we'll have Nanda and then Dr. Sadiq for ending session 1. But then of course it's open. So yes, please
Thank
go
you
ahead.
so much, Tanzil. So my 10 minutes or 5 minutes will be impromptu sharing of my experience working in the policy spaces in Bangladesh and elsewhere. I received a short prompt from Tanzil, which is how talking about the interface between research, practice, and governance. How do we navigate this interface? And I'm going to talk about my experience from Bangladesh specifically. So first we need to understand that navigating research, practice, and governance is not a sprint. It's a marathon through a crowded bazaar, which is loud, messy, and direction can change at any time when you're in that process, right? Just kind of like a background disclaimer that I'm not a finance expert. So my talk will be more around my engagement in Bangladesh with urban climate change resilience, particularly from the perspective of slums, informal settlements. And I'll talk briefly about, basically I'll share 2 insights from that perspective, trying to kind of like indicate or provocate further thoughts for our discussion later part of the day. So 2 things I wanted to talk about. One is data integrity crisis. So I work on slums. You would be aware of the slum census in Bangladesh, how it is or it can be politically manicured, so to say. So when I started my PhD back in 2013. My PhD was focused in Bangladesh, particularly in Dhaka. So when I took from Raju is the development authority in Bangladesh, I took the existing land use map, which located all the slums and other infrastructures which are there on the ground in Dhaka city. I took that map and I went to my site. And I was standing in front of a big slum, but I can't see that in that map. In the map, it says it's a vacant land. And I tested that in multiple other locations, and I realized that apart from some of the big slums like Korail or some of the slums in Mirpur or in Mahakali, those were present in the existing land use map. Rest was invisible. I took back that map to the head of Rajuk at that time, and I asked this question, I can see these slums on the ground, but it doesn't exist in your existing land use map. And the answer that I I got from the head of Raju that if we acknowledge the existence of these slums, we are liable to provide services to them. So you can understand the complexities. I'm just giving one example of slum. There are many other examples when it comes to census, how it is politically manicured to serve certain political agenda or like macro level agenda. And I'm referring back to what you mentioned, Nicola, about the donor incentives, how the projects can be again manicured to serve certain incentives. So that's one challenge. When you don't have the foundation baseline data to work with, if the problem doesn't exist, why are we working on solutions? So that's kind of like macro level kind of like questions we are asked. The other thing about I wanted to talk about is the decision-making processes. You all are aware that we may have some of the best policies in paper in Bangladesh, but we can see the vulnerability on the ground, right? So there is a huge gap between policy and practice. So implementation gap is really, really important. That's where it comes, the concepts and the discussions around practice comes in. So in paper, we are a democratic country. The decision making has to be participatory. But in practice, it is largely driven by clientelistic practices. The process is captured by whoever is the ruling party. I don't want to be political here, but like the political agenda or the macro level agenda to present certain image, right? And that's where that's why the data is manicured, so to say. So again, giving one specific example, I was looking at again back in 2013, 2014 phase. I was looking at the disaster management policies, and I can see that Bangladesh had really brilliant policies. So the structure, the participatory structure, really broken down up until board and community level. So apparently we should have community disaster management committee in paper, and the paper says that okay, I knew that was not existent, but then I took those specific locations where they say that there is a management committee like this that exists. I went there. And I tried to understand, the structure and how they engage, etc., etc. And the other interesting thing is that, according to the policy, we have to have a gender balance in those committees. So there has to be certain numbers of female members in those committees. So I went to that certain location and I was talking to the chairman of that committee first. And I asked that who is the female member of this committee. And then I realized that one of the female member is like 80 years old woman who is bedridden, who doesn't even know that committee exists. So you can understand, how they tick boxes to demonstrate that the committee exists and we ensure that there is a gender balance, etc., etc. But when it comes to practice, how it can be, politically manicured. And then I went to the community, trying to ask about, whether you know about these committees and stuff. I surveyed 99 settlements, more than 80 settlements, didn't even knew about the existence of these committees. So you can understand, when you really try to understand how policies from paper are being translated into practice, everything, falls through the crack. So as academic, I always ask this question to me, and now I want to pose this question to you as well, whether we should try to fix the governance processes or we should think about an alternate system of practice that can survive or that can operate even when the state is fragile. We have experienced so many things in the last 2-3 years, right? And we are still kind of going through that process of change. And we don't know what the future holds for us. And this has been the trend, I think, since 90s, right? We have a fragile governance system. So should we think about frugal innovation? And I hats off to this project which talks about those spaces and frugal innovation locally led processes. So should we talk about rural innovation that more relies on social capital and less on state capital? And that might be a way forward if you want to sustain and don't rely on the fragility of the state system. So I'll stop here, and I know we can share about our experiences across Global South as we go through the discussion and bring references and try to do a comparative understanding in comparison to Bangladesh.
Okay.
So,
Absolutely. No slides, no caps, that's not fair.
When two of my colleagues discussed about the most important hot topic, money, I'm not sure my presentation will get any attraction from you. Anyway, keeping my fingers crossed. But hearing from Anika was an absolute privilege, because this is how, what in social science we call design to participate, or cosmetic design, instead of true participation in the communities. Anyway, I want to spend next 10 minutes on our journey to design something almost impossible, climate resilient home. I'll also present some numbers. Some of these numbers work, and I'll be honest of why some of those still is not enough. First of all, more than 2 out of every 4 people in this planet doesn't have a safe roof over their head. At the same time, if I just recall the experience of Bangladesh from August 2024 flood in Feni, that one single event made 35 million people displaced from their home. I had the privilege of sitting in the COPs, starting from COP18 till COP30 with Subornoda and many other colleagues. We tried to design the fate of the vulnerable communities by throwing off some money to them, but we often fail to recognize that trying to address the vulnerability or trying to address the root cause of vulnerability is not that easy. For example, if today we decide that, okay, everyone is going to live on a safe home, who is going to build that? The construction sector. The problem is the construction sector alone emits 39% of all the greenhouse gas emissions. And the number, as I said, more than 1 billion plus people need home. And most important, there is a difference between home and a house. A house is a structure made out of beams, columns, and walls. But home means where the life retains, where all the other facilities, for example, water, livelihood, happiness, love, everything inhabits. So when we try to design home, sometimes we also fail to recognize that we are seriously falling short behind achieving the SDGs. Just for your information, UNEP published a report a few months ago, 1 year ago, and that showed 13 out of 17 SDG goals are off track. There is no chance that we are going to achieve those targets by 2030. Those are the hard realities. So we started asking a design question. Can we design a home that is so strong to stand against climatic extremes? For example, floods, storms, fire, and non-climatic extremes like earthquake. The answer that we arrived at after 10 years of research and after 7,000 formulas of material samples and testing, the answer is yes, but it requires rethinking every component that is related to home. For example, we ended up designing world's most strongest low carbon brick. The compressive strength on the left, it's around 32 megapascal. Sorry, I'm not trying to be over smart here. It means that it's 3 times stronger than stone and even stronger than concrete. So we have designed a strong material to build a house. At the same time, we designed it in such a manner so that it ticks 3 boxes. First, the embodied carbon of these low carbon bricks are only 10% of fire brick. 1 meter cube of fire brick emits around 256 kilogram of carbon, while our brick emits only 25 kilogram. And it's also 50% cheaper. In Bangladesh, 1 fire brick will cost you around 15 taka, where our production cost is 7 taka. And the technology that we use, the architectural design and structural technology, it brings down the cost of the house to a level that it's even cheaper than a tin shed shanty house. So the cost is cheaper, embodied carbon is low. At the same time, we are not using any kind of imported materials. It's locally available material, just dig your foundation, use the subsoil, and that's all. But the good part is, this house alone can provide you drinking water, can provide you food, can provide you livelihood. If you don't want to go outside your house during or before the flood, you can continue those functions inside of your house. And that house, from the very starting of that design, it's a co-design and co-development initiative. That's why we did not perform the role of engineers or architects, rather the communities took the role. So from the very beginning, we started asking that why a poor family cannot live in a big house. That's why this house is a 6-room house where they have 3 rooms for their living and 3 rooms for pursuing the livelihood facilities. And we have 3 variants as well, like starting from 2-room to 6-room house, so that we can make it affordable to poor families in Bangladesh and this. So before saying anything, let's have a
Video.
Okay, YouTube. we also realized that this is one home, but as Tanzil asked me, what would it take to build 100,000, not only in Bangladesh, but also to the rest of the world. So here, I would like to be honest with you, because where the hard problem actually are, because they are not where we often expect. First is technical scaling. Here we worked for years to solve the material science behind it. But the challenge is how we can replicate that as in the volume. For example, raw material sourcing, consistent quality across dispersed production site, and construction training at scale. In Bangladesh, after doing a market survey of around 18,000 families, we found out a number that we can target up to 283,000 homes per year at 1% market penetration. So this is not at all a prototype problem. This is a system problem. And we have tried to collaborate with a few NGOs in Bangladesh, including REDAA, so that we can train 1,000 entrepreneurs in the next 5 years. We are not sure whether it is a right model for community ownership and empowerment, but it also creates, the problem is if we go for training of 1,000 entrepreneurs, that also creates 1,000 independent point of failure. What will be the governance architecture that holds the standards of the quality of material without centralizing the control? The major problem that we are facing is institutional. Our team spans 2 universities and several NGO partners across Bangladesh and the UK. The breadth is our strength, but Bangladesh housing policy landscape is really fragmented. When it needs to become a national program, change of national building code, but we are not sure which institution will be at the table at that moment, and who holds the intellectual property rights, and what terms that will serve the communities. And most importantly, in line with my other co-presenters, finally, at COP29 and COP30, I have been in rooms to discuss how to operationalize the loss and damage fund or climate finance to scale it up. This project is a textbook loss and damage eligibility, but for not only for highly vulnerable countries, but also for global north. Yet housing sits in a very awkward gap between the humanitarian response and climate infrastructure finance, and that gap is not is political. It's not technical. So the market analysis gives us around 28.3 million houses in Bangladesh which are unsafe and non-Paka homes. The 10-year projection is Bangladesh taka 46,000 crores, and the big BRICS compressive strength is independently verified. The passive house performance is not unreal. So the main problem, whether we are not sure whether it is a governance-related problem, because no single institutions are willing to own it at the national scale, or is it finance architecture that loss and damage and climate finance funds not yet structured for housing, or is it political economy, because the incumbent brick industry employs 1 million workers, 7,000 brick fields, and they will not follow the transition quietly? Or is it something about how we in academia define impact, because that keeps solutions perpetually at the prototype stage? I genuinely don't know all these answers, because what I do know is probably this is the right forum to help figure it out, what can we do and what could Sheffield specifically contribute here. Thank you so much.
Okay. Very hard, difficult questions, but that's why we have the representative from Bangladesh government next. We'll have all the answers. Sundar, can you hear us?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me as well?
Now we have gathered all the difficult questions, and
yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Right. Yep, I can.
Do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to share the presentation?
You can help with that. You can help with that.
Okay. Okay. Just give me a second. Okay. Yes, I think you can start. The only issue is that you might not see your face when you're presenting. Let me just try it. If you can also see your face. You can start. We'll have to come back to Google Meet to see your face at some point, but please start. You can start now.
Okay, thank you, colleagues over there. And I understand that many of those who are present there are very familiar with Bangladesh and also had research experience here. And just to say a few words about me, I did my MSc in project management, focusing on renewable energy projects in Bangladesh from University of Sussex, Science Policy Research Unit. And soon afterwards, I did my PhD. In my PhD from the same SPRU, Science Policy Research Unit, I basically looked at the intersection between temporary project organizing and relatively permanent processes of transformative change, which we define as sustainability transitions. So I was quite worried about will I make sense, but I found that this tension is highlighted, that how project outcomes can be translated into institutional change process. And in terms of practice, I returned from UK in 2023 June, and returning to the civil service, I started looking at the UNFCCC financing windows, namely GCF-JF Adaptation Fund. And I'm also involved with a number of platforms, Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Actions, CVF-V20. I'm the focal point for Bangladesh, and I'm also a focal point for Global Shield Against Climate Risks. And recently I have been given the task of a national alternate focal point for loss and damage fund. And I'm very happy to be here, and this is important. And thank you for giving me the chance to talk on urgent needs in Bangladesh in terms of projects and policies. So could you please, Tanzil, okay. So just to highlight, my talk will be guided by multi-level perspective on socio-technical transition. This perspective is rooted in evolutionary economics, neo-institutional theory, and technology, and sociology of technology. And we understand socio-technical transition as a shift from an unsustainable to a sustainable system of production and consumption. For example, the system of transportation, the system of electricity, the system of heating system, the system of agriculture, and so on. And these shift, transformative change, advances through what this concept understands as through interactions between the landscape, the regime, and the niche. And landscape is understood as exogenous conditions that exert pressure on the regime to change. For example, climate change, or what Nandanda talked about as vision, for example, a political vision. And regime is understood as an unsustainable socio-technical system that tends to resist transformative change, perpetuating the dominant incumbent way of thinking and doing things in a particular sector, as I said earlier, for example, electricity system or mobility system. And niche refers to radical innovations, endogenous drivers that emerge in small niches. And if these innovations, radical innovations, are protected from selection pressure, can break through the regime and stimulate a transition. And what we saw, perhaps with this project of Tanzil maybe, and what we saw about the climate resilient house of Nandanda. And perhaps the business model that Suvarna presented, maybe it may also be linked up with that in some way or the other. So Tanzinda, can we move to the next slide? So here, just to after my lens, I'm looking at the empirical prevalence, just touch upon. For example, locally led adaptation, and we had a project, local government initiative on climate change logic project phase 1, and this timescale you can see on the screen, January 2017 to December 2025. And project cost was 37.22 million, and it was co-financed, GOB and the development partners, and financing modality was blended grants and loans, as Suvarna highlighted some of that, how that makes sense. And special coverage was 72 union councils across 77 districts, and this selection was guided by Climate Vulnerability Index. Now we have moved on to the second project, and it remained almost the same, but the coverage is 300 union councils across 334 districts. And the same thing happened CVI, and the other features remained the same. Now the challenge is scaling in and scaling up at scale and speed. Scaling is already here, so it's speed. So scaling in, what you understood as how temporary, the tension here, where temporary project and the permanent process of change converge, and where do they diverge? So the challenge is how these projects are scaling in, stimulating or driving institutional change process, maybe in terms of fiscal planning, in terms of sectoral priorities, and in terms of gender mainstreaming. So is it policy-wise bringing about that change? And if I say scaling up, then I look at that, okay, it was 77 union councils in the first phase, and the second phase, it is 300 union council. And you might have known that in Bangladesh, this is the lowest tier of urban local government, and we have 4,557 union councils. Then you can measure, or we can measure the time, its scalability in terms of coverage. So that's a big question, and I know that you are already aware of that. So now can we move on to the next one? So it is public sector. Now we move on to the private sector. Leadership in energy and environmental design, LEED certification. We have LEED certified RMG factories, 261, and driven by the private sector, by the entrepreneur in a critical industry that provides 86% of the foreign currency. So it is 109 platinum, 133 gold. Okay. Now benefits. What benefits? Benefits are given here in terms of 30% less energy and water use, lower GHG emissions, and better waste management, and improved worker safety, productivity, and profitability, maybe. But what we have understood that this certification doesn't improve their chances of access to the market, global market, but it boosts their brand value. So indirectly it may help, but it does not create a condition that, okay, we will buy this from your factory. Now this is what we have learned from the industry insiders. Now the scaling trap is here. From moving from these LEED certification, it's about the factory, but the production process decarbonization is the next step forward, which is linked with, for example, the carbon border adjustment, as you understand, for example, CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism in European markets, and linking up with the global circular economy value chain. And this is why the entrepreneurs are trapped and not moving forward. So here comes in the scaling issue in the private sector as well. And why private sector I'm highlighting? because government has a responsibility to create enabling environment so that this industrial process can decarbonize, can stay with the global value chain that focuses on ESG standards to protect its export markets. So this is why government's role is important here. So can you, Tanzil, can you please, Dr. Tanzil, move on to this? So, and then now we have the new government, democratically elected, and the government has many climate commitments, which are very important because climate-wise policy and politics is quite critical. The government has, for example, action-wise, what they want to do. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
For example, the action-wise, 2,000 kilometers of rivers and canals, excavation and re-excavation by 2030, and 250 million tree plantation by 2030. So this is about direct intervention, planned and promised, and also promised a system change, for example, introducing integrated water and water management systems. And technology-wise intervention, introducing alternate wetting and drying AWD technology in 3 to 50% of countries' rice fields. Now, from the institution, from the interventions to the institution, government has also promised to establish some new institutional arrangements. For example, National Blue Economy Authority, Coastal Development Board, and also after this institutional arrangement, we can also see that a new business model, circular future model, I mean, they have named it the circular economy. So ranging from a specific interventions committed to establish new institutional arrangements and to establish new business model. So very big, very comprehensive kind of commitments by the government. And next, we can look at how they can finance. So they have identified innovative climate financing, market-based financing instruments, green Bangladesh bonds, which are worth 50,000 crore BDT to be issued by 2030 to fund climate resilient projects and to earn up to $1 billion annually in carbon credits. Now, the challenge here, these are my personal opinions, and I think Dr. Tanzil, Chatham House rules apply here. So these are my personal opinion. So the point is, when we are establishing new institutions, did you consider why we are establishing it? Are we layering of it on the top of others? How it can be reconciled with the existing institutions? Why the existing institution didn't fail? Did you look at that? So this is a layering practice. In the policy process, layering, drifting goes on, and conversion is very rare. So the point, political rhetorics or reality, projectification trap, or should initiate some permanent process of change. Those are the challenges, and we would like to believe that the government is having these commitments and will be trying to implement those. So Dr. Tanzil, could you, here let me talk about the model. This model is about transition management cycle, and this cycle, the inside circle is my addition, not the theoreticians work on it, and it is also it also drew on the concept of multi-level perspective, as I explained earlier. So now the operational governance domain, where projects comes in and projects are lost, they can't be scaled in. And if I look at the strategic governance domain, where shared understanding and policies, as one speaker without slides, he pointed out, and she has done everything on my part, I think, data integrity concern, decision-making processes, policies on papers, not in practice, deficit democracy or dictated democracy. So many, many things she covered. So these are the challenges at the strategic governance domain. And the reflexive governance domain, it applies to all the domains basically. So too much focusing on projects. So what we explained as ad hocism, path-dependent incremental development, perpetuating the entrenched way of thinking and doing things in a particular sector. Now we need to look at, are we addressing the symptoms or the problems itself? So symptomatic treatment for decades going on, not inspiring a transformative change, a systemic change, then automatically, necessarily, we are drawn to structural and systemic barriers. For example, the planning process, the Planning Commission in Bangladesh, for example, Planning Commission in Bangladesh comprises 4 sector divisions, 15 annual development program sectors, and 76 subsectors. In addition to that, 56 ministries, with that departmental agencies, and with that 2 tiers of local governments with geographical overlap. So mind-boggling. I am lost. So I'm not going to explain that. Now, external reliance. For decades, we are relying on supranational organizations. We are relying on consultancy. Probably that's why the policies are so much and so many, and policies comes here as a process, as an output of a project. And most of the policies, I don't know, collect dust, who knows what. So if we dig into it, many things may come out. So I reiterate that I am not speaking on behalf of the government. I'm still a researcher. I'm engaged in research work, and I'm academically oriented. I'm looking into these empirical problems and trying to connect it to concept and theories. And the next one is, so the question is institutional capacity. So it was believed that this consultation and the supranational organizations' engagement will improve the institutional capacity. What I observed, that institutional capacity, did it progress positively? Or that is there any positive development or neutral or negative? My crude assumption is it's negative. And I'm very sorry to say that. And the next one is malfunctional local government. Is it malfunctional? We understand. For example, Raju, whose duty is what? We are talking about locally led. Who will lead? Where is the ownership? So the local governments overlapping jurisdiction, and thus these governments do not have any jurisdiction on land. So if we look at the UNCCD, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, if we look at the Convention on Biological Diversity, these are possibly for Bangladesh should be major focus, but we do not hear much about that. And without any land zoning, how can I say? And we don't have that for many places, but we have that for some places. For example, for Dhaka City, we have a special land zoning kind of provisions. But if we look at the implementation of it, as one of the speaker identified, oh, this land is not supposed to be used like this, then why is it being used like this? So who is the owner of it? Ownership will be a challenge. And we do very much agree that it has to be locally led, locally owned, not only locally led and locally owned, but also sectoral ownership must be there. But can we say there is sectoral ownership? Just to highlight one thing, NAP was adopted, National Adaptation Plan, by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Where is the ownership? Whose NAP it is? For the for the Ministry of Agriculture, for the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries, and NDC. Whose NDC is it? Is it the NDC of the because NDC focuses on mitigation, reduction of GHG emissions. And the major sources of are energy sector, Efadul sector as well. So is it their NDC? Is it their NAP? We are struggling to say, sector, you are the owner of this climate system. This is where your productivity is threatened or potentially threatened or going to be threatened, compromising the food security of Bangladesh, and it is your ownership. Can you design a climate project or priority, align it with your sectoral priorities and fiscal planning? We are sorry to say we are lagging seriously behind. Now, we want to ask bold questions, how deep the incumbency is. This question was asked by Andy Sterling, a professor at the University of Sussex. I found it in 2019. I found it very, very relevant for Bangladesh. And I feel like very interested to explore how deep, extensive, and possibly vicious the incumbencies, the regimes are, how structurally we preserve it, how systemically we protect it, perpetuate it. That's a bold question I often think, I feel like that I should ask. Now, we need theoretically grounded and empirically relevant and useful answers for which this intervention is possible. And I also stand for interdisciplinary research for sure. And even transdisciplinary research may be our next way forwards. Even if we cannot, in the practice, cannot build the cat, the academia should not feed the conceptual frames only. They have to come up with bold questions. That has to be theoretically grounded, definitely, but that must make the ground that these are the structural and systemic problems, and this is what what is being done is a symptomatic treatment, ignoring the problem itself. So with these words, I'm as a practitioner, I'm very passionate, and I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be invited. And thank you, Dr. Tanzil, for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Khaled. You'll get the award for the most honest bureaucrat ever. But I think these are really important questions that have been raised. Instead of solutions, you just added more. So I think that's where we are. I mean, it's been a long stretch. So maybe we take a comfort break. There's coffee, tea. If all the problems have not woken you up, feel free to have some tea and coffee. And then we reconvene at 3:15, and then we change the world.
There's no tea coffee for Sadi, right?
Yes, it's
no problem. I'll get it from you.
Self-funded.
All right, I'm taking back to Bangladesh.
Thank you. Khaled, apologies that we did not share the tea and coffee now, but inshallah when we're Bangladesh.
Okay, I will reconnect Dr. Tanzil. Will I reconnect or no?
You can just mute yourself or turn on the video, have a break and rejoin, or leave and reconnect. It's up to you.
Okay, thank you.